I'm going to be using the primaries. It would be easier not to, but since several of you are using just primaries, this is a good opportunity for color study. I'm using vermilion or cad red medium. I'm using cad yellow light and ultramarine blue. These three colors and some white. I'm going to mix up a nice dark pile, which will have a lot of blue in it. And I'd like to have, I've already started a little bit here. I'd like to have a little bit of a greenish tint to this dark pile because apples are green before they're red. So it always makes sense to me for flowers and apples to put a little bit of green in them. And you can do that a couple of ways. You can just mix your red and blue, or you can come over here and make yourself a little pile of green to start out. Whoops, it has a little red in it, but that's okay. There's some dark greenish, and I can use that in this pile of reddish color. I don't want to put too much yellow in it, but you see how that makes it just a little bit darker, and it leans to the green side there. Whereas if you just add the blue to it, you don't get that same dark color. Almost a brown color. So the brightest red, and I'm just going to go ahead and make a range here for what I see on the apple, is here. Then it moves towards the yellow. My paint's gotten a little messy here. So we can move from the darkest dark all the way around to the light. And I do see some really light yellow in a couple of places. So that's a nice range. It took about 30 seconds to mix up. I'd like to have a little bit more dark of this dark green. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up another pile down here. Ultramarine blue. And some yellow. Let's go ahead and make a pretty good size. That's a big pile. Let's see, not quite that much. Okay. That must have a little Prussian mixed with it because it's looking pretty kind of turquoisey. But let's see what happens when we mix the red in. A little more yellow. There we go. Now there's a pretty good range there of colors. Can warm it up more with the red. This is a good chance for you to see how to mix these darks and see how you can tweak it from reddish to greenish to bluish, really brownish here. These are very similar. And then some over here, that's a little like alizarin. Let's just put pure blue in that. See what happens. So there's a lot of darks in there. That's what we're going to start with, is the dark. We're also going to mix up a little of this background color, which would be easiest to just use yellow ochre. But let's see if we can mix it from the primary here. Oops, and I got a little green in that. But that's okay. We're going to put some red with it. Actually, we're going to put some purple with it. So let's mix up a nice purple over here with some of this red. Here's some purple. It's hard to tell till you put some white with it. It's going in, if it's going in the purple direction. Okay. There we go. All right, so we'll just grab a little of that, mix it in with the yellow. Get some of this red, warm it up. Really going greenish. We don't really want it to be greenish. Oops, too much red. See, doesn't take much to really goof your color up. So good lesson. How do we fix that? Although it's pretty close to what I see up there, it's a little bright. So the opposite of orange is blue. Yeah. So that tones that down, and that's just about right for the background. I've prepared my canvas not very well. It's actually my sketchbook with some Zinsser with a little yellow acrylic, and I sort of made a dark-ish color for the grapes up here. And when I closed the book, it stuck. So it doesn't really matter. I'm going to paint over this. I want to get an idea of the size of this apple. I don't want it too high. I'm going to put it about here. And that seems about right for a life-size apple, a big apple. If you were doing a little Fuji or Gala apple, it might be a little smaller. So I'll start off with it as a circle. But you can tell right off the bat that that looks like an apple. I mean an orange. That looks like an orange. So now that I've made a place for it and decided on size, I'm going to go back around the edge, and I'm going to really look at the angles as you go around this apple. Because an apple usually has a bit of a base that it stands on. This one is tilted forward a bit. So and then knowing where the center is another thing. And also I like to go ahead and draw the shape of the shadow. And I'm looking at how far up the shadow goes. And it's halfway up the apple. So right there. I can't see the entire length of the shadow. That's important because sometimes if the light source is high, it's going to be wider. If it's low, it's going to be a short elliptical shape. So it's about halfway. That's all the drawing I'm going to do, just about a minute's worth of drawing. As with the other paintings lately, I've been using these ivory filberts and a couple of mongoose brushes. Think about the size of your subject and how much work it's going to be. I may need this smaller one to get in here with the stem and some details, but pretty much this size 6 rosemary ivory is a good size. I always swish it in a little mineral spirits because I use a lanolin based hand cleaner on my brushes after I clean them, just to keep them oiled up. When your brush starts to get a little bit of a wild hair like that, a representative from Rosemary Brushes said on these synthetics, you can stick them in a cup of almost boiling water and it will help melt those bristles back. Not boiling, but almost boiling. So I'm going to start with the darkest dark and ask myself if it feels warmish or coolish. And every stroke I lay down is going to be pretty dark to start. I've got a lot of glare on the canvas right now, or on the page because of the windows, and because this is a dark. I'm putting a little bit more ultramarine blue with my dark because it doesn't feel quite dark enough. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this shadow in first. Seems to get redder as it goes near the edges, so I'm just going to quickly mask that in. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. If it's the wrong color, I'll adjust it later. On the apple, it seems to be a bit warmer than the cast shadow. The shadow follows all the way up around the perimeter of the apple. Comes in a bit here, here. And I'm leaning more towards my red, my dark that has a lot of red in it. warmer dark here. It's okay if you make it a little larger. And then there's some here in the, if you measure where that center of that apple is, it's 1, 2, 3.5 down. 1, 2, 3.5. So I went a little bit low. It might come up a bit higher than that. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to another brush. It's a good idea to have a couple of these filberts out. And I'm going to lay in the next color, swish it in the turp, and go for a pretty dark red here. It's going to be my next. I learned how to paint apples in a toll painting class. And we painted them kind of like a rainbow. We did all the darks and then all the mediums. That's where having your colors mixed up ahead of time is going to be really helpful. There's some dark there. I'm going to wipe my brush and move on up in my value scale here and get a little bit lighter as I move up. Going from dark. I'm going to leave a spot for that highlight, or I may go ahead and paint over it. I'm getting more towards the yellow as I move over to this side. There's a bit of that on the very bottom. And you note that the charcoal just mixes right in with it. I'm going to use some of this background color over here because the yellow is not as bright as the yellow on this side. So I'm going to use some of that yellow ochre color I mixed up. And I may have to lighten that, but right now it's working okay. There's a bit of that yellow ochre color right here. Oops, too much white in it. Don't get into that white right now. Now once you get this whole thing covered, I'm going to switch to another clean brush because I'm going to grab up some of this pure vermilion. A little bit of yellow in it to put right here. And here. I'm going to overshoot that yellow a little bit just because, so that it'll register when I start blending it. And when you're painting an apple, think about the planes of the apple too, just like you think about the planes of a head. Painting an apple is a whole lot like painting a head. So you want to think about the individual planes. The front plane, the side plane. I'm using a really large brush here. So if you're real uncomfortable with that, you can switch to a smaller brush. All right, so not very gratifying, right? Let's keep moving on. You grab another filbert, pretty good size filbert. And I'm going to go ahead with a little medium because I want this to spread easy to lay this background color in. And it's darker here by the shadow. And then it gets lighter as it moves out and away. Not quite that light. There's a little bit of an orangish tone to it, so that's okay. Put some of that in there. when I add white with it, it really chalks it up, so I'm trying to be kind of careful with that. This is like I don't know if that's a paper, that this original apple, and I don't know who the artist is. It was just posted somewhere with no name. But I use this as an illustration in my drawing book, and I thought it would be a great study for us to try to see if we can get the details in here. So now I'm going to move, since I have the canvas almost covered, and I've already used 4 or 5 brushes, I'm going to move to make sure I have it all covered. That way I can start using a little softer brush and wiggle some of these colors in together. Make sure everything's covered. Thinking about those angles as you go around that apple, because it's not perfectly round. All right, now I'm moving to a little softer. I don't know if it'll work yet, but we're going to give it a shot. And I'm going to come in here and see if I can brighten up these transitions a little. Lot of glare on this. Let's see. There, that's better. It's better for the video and a little better for me too. So adjust it when you're working on dark areas. Adjust it as needed to get rid of those glares. All right, and you see how much easier it starts to move around now that you have the whole thing covered. I can't stress that enough when you're painting, to go ahead and get things blocked in. That way you have a better feel. I want a little bit of greenish color up here in this area, if I can get it to register. It's a pretty color. Bit of that in the front here. There's a bit of it right there. Be mindful of your brush strokes. The most exciting part of the apple, or anything you're doing really, is the highlights. And it's the last thing you do. So try to make yourself stay away from that right now. I'm going to warm up the edge of this shadow because it's so green. It's not registering right at all. It's also warm down here. This is really when it starts to be fun. That first block-in stage isn't very exciting. See how just once you move to a softer brush, you can use a little medium if you need to, just to make the paint slide. You can warm that shadow up. There's a pretty sharp edge here on the edge of the apple and the shadow. And I just want to make that kind of go out here and fade out. Your shadow edges don't need to be too hard. This is a soft mongoose. There we go. After all, it's a shadow. If it's too hard, it will look like another thing on your painting. Not like an apple at all. Not like a shadow for an apple. All right, I'm wiping my brush a lot between. This is again the mongoose, which is very soft. I want to bring my edges down in. And it's a pretty hard edge right there. This dark. Whoops, and see I had some light from the background. See how that contaminated the dark right off the bat. Let me go back in there and fix that. And even though this edge of this apple is angular, it's still an apple. So don't let it get too angular. And I'm going to pick up some of this really beautiful bright red again, this vermilion. See if I can lay it on the top right here. Yeah. It's got some yellow in it too. And I know you want to paint that stem. Last thing we'll paint. Highlight and stem, so don't get to the cart before the horse. Now, that yellow's too bright. So I'm going to have to come back in and adjust it. It does have some shadow with it because there's already wet paint on there. I don't need to add a lot more dark. I just probably want to brighten this red up a bit down here in the bottom. Gotten too muddy. It's real easy if a color's too bright like that to just barely drag your brush over it and knock some of that brightness down. A lot of glare still on this apple. Let's see what happens if I turn it a little more even. There we go. A lot of glare right here. And I want to leave this bright red color that I've laid on the top, but I need to work it in a bit. So I'm sitting back, let's see, 1, 2.5 of these paintbrushes distance so that I can video, which is good. This is making me look at it from a distance. There's also this really brightest color. Ask yourself, where's the brightest note on the apple? And it's usually between the shadow and the highlight or the light. Really bright here. Think about the roundness of the apple. Think about actually Helen Van Wyck's teacher, Roscoe, would say, I believe he would say that, or she said it, to hold an apple in your hand and eat an apple while you're painting an apple, so that you really get the feel for the shapes. And again, this one looks so beautiful and realistic because the values are so beautiful. The lights are light and the darks are dark. The mediums are good. So instead of doing this, you want to kind of to retain your nice darks, because I've got light on my brush. I don't want to get up in the darks with that. So I want to just chip these together, barely along the edges, kind of comb them together. And the direction of the brush stroke is important because it wraps around the apple and gives it that really nice round texture, round feeling. Don't rule out your finger. It's a great tool. I might have to stop and squeeze out more yellow. All right. Looked at my picture for a minute, or my painting for a minute while I was getting extra paint. And I want to squint and make sure I'm getting my colors right. Really bright along the top edge here and here. That's about the right value, and that was some background color. Your brain will tell you to put the bright yellow over there, but remember this is shadow. Bright red dips down here a bit. All right, I still don't have this area in very well. So because I have so much paint on the canvas, or on the apple, I'm going to have to use a softer brush to lay in. And I'm going to have to wipe in between. This is my yellow ochre mixture, which is the background color. Almost pure yellow ochre right here. And when you're working in wet and wet like that, you really have to use a light touch. Now I'm going to make a little bit of a highlight color with that yellow ochre mixture in white. Looks like pure white, but it's not. It's too much, too much, too much. Let me go back to the yellow ochre color. Get that back in. There we go. You can make that brighter than you see it if you want to, because again, when you get all this wet paint on here, it's real easy to lose your way. Lose all your lights. Then that white, the lighter color mixed in with yellow ochre and white, can go right on top, right here. It's much brighter yellow over here, so don't drag your yellow ochre mixture over here. This is a cad yellow light mixture on this side. Where else do I see that? I could bump it up a little bit down here. But that should be the pure yellow ochre and no white mixed in it, so be careful. All right, I'm going to move now to the dark again. I've lost the dark for that little hole where the stem comes through. And I want to put that back in. It's really dark. I want to bump this dark back here a little bit darker, but I want to stay in the red family with it. Where else do I see any dark at all? Down here under the apple, I've lost some of that. Very dark. The shadow's almost always darker right here next to the object. And then it gets diffused and lighter as it moves out. All right, I'm wiping my brush after using that dark. And I'm going to kind of chisel in this color here. I don't want to lift too much off, so I'm wiping my brush every single time. And really it's put a little bit of yellow ochre on my brush because there's a nice yellow color right here on top of the shadow, right in the center. I'm wiping the brush, making sure it's clean before I start this wiggling it together. I really like this pretty red color on the top, so I don't want to lose that. It's a nice dark red. So wipe the brush so you can keep all the values separate. A lot of dark that wraps around the top here. Make sure if you've got some red or yellow on your brush, before you touch the dark area, clean it off or get a different brush, because you'll contaminate those darks. There we go. And there's this brightest yellow right about there. Every time my brush leaves the camera, I'm wiping it. So there's a lot of that going on. And you're modeling around the apple, thinking about the dimension of it like a head of a big ball of clay or something. Shadow goes down. It's way over here just a bit. See, I've got red on my brush, so I'm getting in the shadow. It's real tempting. Oops, put some more shadow color on my brush so I don't wipe that off. All right, let me tend to, clean brush again, let me tend to this side a bit with some cad yellow light. And I'm going to try to brush mix it right here on the canvas, but whoa, is that too light or what? So you can tell the moment you do that it's too light, but I could deposit it in a couple of places. And then wipe my brush, get a little of the yellow ochre mixture, especially up here. Kind of work it in. Because the paint's wet and there's so much red on there, you can do that. That's a lot. And it wouldn't hurt to mix up a little bit of like a pretty orangish color here for a couple of spots, just to brighten it up. All right, so I'm going to stop there for a second. I'm going to get back away from it, and all this needs to be softened together, and I need to come back in with my background color and make that pop and add the stem. I made a few observations as I took a break and washed my hands and squeezed out some more paint. The apple does not look like you're looking down on it, so I measured, and the proportions should be that the dark edge is 1/3 of the way down. So I need to move that down. So that would be there, there, and there. And it's 2 3/4 of a proportion wide. So I'm just going to make one dark mark there, and then I'll adjust that. And it also needs to be rounder. And once I put these highlight spots in, that'll make a big difference. So I pulled this down. I'm going to pull this over just a bit. So now it does have a little bit more of a feeling of looking down. Let's double check it. 1, 2, 3. It could maybe even go down a tiny bit more. And let's see, this is almost an orangey color. It's rounder here. The mongoose brushes are really good for laying in a little bit of light like that on top of wet paint. I could put this in, but I feel like this is a yellowish highlight on the top of the apple, and over here, it's not quite so yellowish. It seems like it has a bit of a pink tone to it. I'm going to wrap it this way. There's also a real light spot right behind the stem, so I want to try to get that in. I have a clean brush, and I want some yellow light and yellow ochre mixed to give me a nice light pop right here. Now, another brush that I didn't include, but I think I might use, is a Kolinsky sable, kind of long brush, not really a rigger, but a softer detail brush to kind of wiggle some of these highlights in. Just zigzag those in, because you see a little bit of striation in this apple. And the big knife or the other ones that you might be tempted to use would drag all this color around, smear it. I still may want to do that, but I like to just dipple this a little. See, if you don't make this highlight big enough, by the time you get it all whittled down, you'll lose it. I was almost tempted to make the highlight bluish. And I may try a little bit more yellow in this area. Definitely some here. Definitely a bit more down here. Oops, that's too. Bit too much, but it's pretty glowy down here. Let's straighten this bottom part out. All right, last part, and I do want to smooth a little of this, but I also want to go around the perimeter and clean up these edges. I want to make sure I have the right color. It's got red in it. I don't want to put red in it. I want to keep it yellow. So make sure your brush is clean. Put in a little medium. There we go. Edges to this apple to be clean. There we go. Across the top here. All right, last part is to take a soft brush. I pulled out a couple of my little cheap watercolor brushes that I want to just barely blend some of these areas together. And then the stem, this will also help to knock down some of the glare on the dark part of this apple. I want it smoother. I want it a little smoother through here. Sometimes when you do the blending, you end up with a kind of a linear effect on it, and I don't want it that way. I want it to look like smooth apple skin. That goes this way more. Just think about the roundness of this apple. Round, round, round. Now, how do we put the stem in there without goofing it all up? Well, I have this ivory rigger type of a brush. You could use a liner. It will help. It's over to the left a little. And I want to end up with it about here. So let me extend this over just a bit before I start. There we go. Get that dark back in here. All right. And I've put it in the medium, and I've twisted it to where I have kind of a soupy. The top of the stem always has a little circle on it. And it's got some yellowish colors in the top. Might go back in here and work on this a little more. There's a little bit on this edge that I could adjust. But I'm going to stop and step away from it for a bit now and make a decision. See if there's any other little small things I want to do. I'm not real thrilled with it. I still like to have some more pops of red in a couple of places, yeah. And I could add those at the end. But I want some really beautiful, bright red on here. A bit right here. That's really bright. There we go. Now, so I've added those, and I want to work them in just a bit with this soft brush. Without losing the intensity of the color. It's so pretty. And I'd like to pop one more little pop of highlight on there. Right here. There we go. Now, and a tad bit right there. Take that and pull that down just a little, but it kind of accentuates the stem a little. Yellow and white in this highlight color, and it's got a little red now. You have to kind of pop it on there thick. If you get too much, go back in here and just break the edges of it a little. I think I'd like a little of that. Maybe here and maybe here. Yeah, I like that. Just to feature it a little more. So that's kind of asymmetrical, but here and here. This is a little muddy still, and I lost the darkness right there by the edge of the apple. Made it a little too wide. Remember to lay these dark strokes down kind of catty-cornered so they're not a shelf that's holding light. Let me get my little soft brush again right here. Knock some of these ridges off, and then I'm going to be done. There we go. Okay, that's it.